And I think if we want to start by thinking of things relational, then we should ask ourselves about the land we're sitting on. And so in that spirit of a relational context or being, I want to just start by acknowledging the territory that we're on and tea and the tree land that we're sitting on. My name is Cindy Hanson. I teach in adult education and human resource development.
Yeah, my name is José, not José. José Wellington Sousa. I'm from Brazil, and I'm a PhD student in this faculty, and I'm a sectional lecturer as well in the Faculty of Business.
My name is Sabah, and I'm also Dr. Cindy's student. I'm doing my PhD in adult education, so I would also like to share some of my experiences from community development in Pakistan.
Okay, so we're going to start, holy cow, we're going to start with the definition of community-based research. Now, if you look up community-based research, you're going to see there's as many definitions for this as there are ideas on what it is and how it takes place. So, can you click on the next one? Yeah, I'm going to try. Oh, okay. So CBR Canada defines community-based research in this way. And I think what's really key in here is the idea of creating and mobilizing knowledge for change, engaging communities. It's not research for communities, it's research with communities, and sometimes it's research with communities and communities, not necessarily with outside researchers, and we'll talk about that as we go along. It's also about meeting needs and who's defining the needs of whom and how they need to be met. And so in many respects, we see this as a political process. Yeah. So community-based participatory research or community-based participatory action research is often defined as putting research into action. And that very much comes out of a northern paradigm, people like Kurt Lewin and action research, where the idea was to put research into action, that research is not a stagnant thing for the benefit of the elite or academics, but that research should be put into action. And as iterations of action research, community-based research, participatory action research take place, it becomes, the meaning of what those things are become more diffused, more confusing, more complex, and some of that is really good and some of it is also highly problematic. So the important thing in community-based action research is that it examines power relationships. It is inherently political, so if you want to do community-based research, it's going to be political. The entrance of an outsider into a community is political. The engagement of members of a community with each other is political. So we acknowledge that, and in our talk we'll also give quite a few quotes from Paul Freire that education is never neutral. So we also believe that it's we have to take an approach that's very reflexive, and we constantly have to be asking ourselves, what am I doing in this situation? What am I bringing to this situation? What am I taking out of it? And I don't mean that in a really shallow sort of way. I mean asking, should I be here? What's my exit strategy? What's my entrance strategy? The article we talked about using at one point is called, you have to drink a lot of tea.
Yeah,
Yes.
something like that.
So drinking a lot of tea is also an analogy for spending a lot of time building relationships. The other thing about participatory research is that the goal is to create change. And change is not, You know, we often think of it in a liberal sort of notion of people learning to live equally with each other or respecting each other. That's not the kind of change we're talking about. We're talking about a transformation of perspective. So, and also you have a responsibility to the community you're working in to do no harm and to leave things better than when you came in, hopefully. Doesn't always happen, does it? Let's go a little bit quicker. Okay. Yeah, if you click once more. Okay. So this is, Hacker uses community-based research as a continuum. Essentially what this is as you look at different forms of research and what they're called, they go from left to right, from more researcher-focused to more participatory approaches, okay? So when people talk about participatory action research, generally they're talking about research where the community is engaged from the start in thinking about what it is that they want researched, okay? So lots of times, even thinking about doing participatory action research from the perspective of an academic institution is not possible because of ethics, because of funding structures, et cetera, et cetera. I can't talk about those things. So I think what we wanted to sort of illustrate, and this is also problematic, the idea of a continuum. So starting from sort of more researcher-led to creating action to more control and more participant-driven as you get farther to the left. Yeah. Okay. I always get my directions, but you know what I mean. So, but the thing that's important in this is that there's also different levels of relational powers or disruptions in these different categories. And I just think it's really important when we're doing research, it's not that one is any less valuable than another. It's okay to do community-based research that's not participatory action research. That there's different, but it's to understand the differences in what we're doing. And all of that is okay. You know, it's validating that too. So basically we believe that power relations are always asymmetrical, that we constantly need to be reflecting on how that's operating in what we do, and that operation is often discursive, and it's not necessarily only between the researcher and the community, but it also exists within communities or communities of practice or organizations or groups of individuals, okay? So we know that in our own lives, so why do we think it's any different in research practice, right? So I just want to end, well, I'm going to come back later, because we're each going to talk a bit from experience as well, but I just want to end by saying that a lot of the more sort of participatory ways of thinking of research, where there's a strong interrogation into the relationship of the people involved in the research, come out of the Global South. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that because we certainly have a Western bias in a lot of the research we do, and it's important to acknowledge that work of people like Paulo Freire is often included, Rajesh Tandon, Orlando Falls Borda from Colombia, Maria Lisa Swantz from Finland. So all of these people have been big contributors to the notion of participation. Right.
Okay, who's next?
Yeah, I think I would talk more about the community development, particularly international community development work, which I've been working in Pakistan, and with reference to community-based research. Where I come from is from northern Pakistan, and we have a history of development work in that area for over like 40 years or so. So what actually the two problems that we come across and which I think need to be discussed from my own perspective is with reference to power relations and secondly to the reference to the ethics that we come across. So whenever we go with a community development work and we do the CBPR or community-based action research or just the community-based research, we need to realize that there are potential, like as researcher, a lot many times we are very much forced to do things in hurry according to the timelines that we have. And in that quickness or in that hastiness, we sort of become less responsive towards the power relations that exist in the communities. So we have the, particularly the right of the representation in the community when we as the researchers, at that time I used to be part of the community, so now I see myself as a researcher, but when the researchers go there, they probably do not remain very sensitive to the right of the representation, particularly when it comes to involving women, although it's not the case in my, the work I did, but a lot many times the minority groups, particularly socially excluded groups, and then faith-based group a lot many times. If there is a difference of faith groups there, sometimes minorities get ignored, and then indigenous groups, disabled, and a lot many others who have a lesser voice. They do not, like in all these power relations, they remain excluded. Secondly, sharing the authority and responsibility when researchers or the community development experts go there, they have their authority by the virtue of having funds, knowledge, and much more. Okay, thank you. So that's one thing I want to talk about, that there is sometimes conflicting representations. Like there is a system of representation in the community, and then they have their own representation of portfolios, or they have their own standards and the way they do it. So there is conflict, and the power relations involved in that conflicting situations is really hard to understand. How much time do we give in to understand that is one concern. When the democratic representations, a lot many times researchers use the word democratic representations, that sometimes does not resonate with the community's way of representing things. So that's one thing I think we need to talk about, the power issues. Second is ethical concerns, particularly when it comes to ethics, all the research based like privacy and other concerns of the community is regularly tackled. But when we go to the communities, there are multiple layers of histories, political affiliations, religious representations, or whatever you call it. So it's important to understand all these dynamics and include these aspects also into the ethical frameworks. And sometimes the institutional ethical frameworks do not really go so deep in these discussions, and somehow we run the risk of losing the integrity of the research on some of these fronts. So here is some of my experiences which I want to talk about in terms of geographic location. I normally worked in the very extreme end of the Pakistan. So if you could see, these are the old green plains, these are the mountainous regions, we have some of the deserts around here, and then we have mountainous regions. So these are the Himalayas, the Karakoorums, and then obviously Hindu Kush. So it's a land just with lot of mountains, with really mountains. It's just a glimpse of it, what it looks like, and that's just to show you how the roads and the accessibility in these areas is difficult. You can see how the mountains are carved to make the ways into it. So as Cindy talked about, the continuum, I also refer to the Hackett's and borrowing from her. So there is a range of projects working in northern Pakistan, particularly with Aga Khan Development Network. So we see there are projects which actually take it on the very surface level. They're just the investigative-driven studies. They go to the community, study a phenomena, and call it community work. There are others which actually locate a project in the community and call it the community work. There are other forms of research where they actually, to an extent, get involved with the community and we refer to these projects as community-based research projects. There are others which actually takes it more seriously. They go into the more deeper layers of how to involve communities from the grassroots, sit with them, think through the processes, design various tools, and do all that process with the communities. And there are projects which should be community-driven, but probably I personally had never been on this stage, probably for the reason that I was never very much aware of the distinctions between the community-based work and community action research and community-based participatory work. So if I would go now, probably I would try to keep my projects down here. So there are.
You gotta keep clicking it.
Yeah, okay. When we talk of the community-based participatory research, I see it something which is very organic, coming out from the communities, and is very ethical and very multilateral in many ways. There are a lot many relationships you're dealing with at the right time, as many of the health researchers in Canada and US, they use community-based research and they call it a research which is coming from margins. Like it's a blurred boundary, margins and mainstreams, going beyond the mainstreams, going into the margins, and then probably bringing it to the mainstreams again. So it's something like a rubber band or something. I also wanted to put some of the pictures of the women on this slide also, because in AKDN's work, where I worked for like a decade or so, women are essentially part of the research projects. They really contribute, and historically we have not been very gendered in a way, although we live in a very hierarchically or patriarchal society in context of Pakistan. But I think we have traditionally not been so patriarchal in many ways. So we see this. The other day I was trying to find some of the details if I could find, and I was reading a report of National Geographic of 1957. The report is quite a long report, October 1957. It also says that the communities at that time had not been gendered or had not been very patriarchal. So I think it's a lucky thing for us to we see all these women. In terms of research processes, you see that the communities, when we go to the communities as the project people, when we go to the communities, we see them as a co-researcher and see their role evolving in the, like we don't see the community and ourselves as very distinct partners, we see one another as informing one another. And I think it has been a tradition now in our area that communities are respected as being contributors to the knowledge. Secondly, when we say, when we go to the communities, we mostly try to find out the groups, like if it's a community of 20 households, we would like to share our concerns and our research projects, and then we would like to find out who are the people interested in that type of communities. If 2 of you would volunteer, we would like a committee to be formed where researchers teams and the communities team come together and they start working on. But in most of the literature, we feel that, we see that it's recommended that all the project design, project proposals, questionnaires, methodology, methods, all the details should be sorted out with the communities. But in practice, I at least hadn't been doing things that way, but anyhow, it was a sort of participatory relationship, but probably I was not that informed at that time, so it's a bit bumpy. So I'm not making a claim that it's very linear as it's in academics. We involved communities, but it's when we needed them or when they were interested. So it was not very linear, but it was some mix and match or patchy type of a relationship. But it's very common to have groups in the communities. And then many of the literature that I find, it also says that the communities are part of the funding and proposal development for the funding purposes. In our case, it didn't used to happen because we already had the fundings when we go to the communities. So that was something I wanted to not make any claims on. And you see when we talk with the women, this is a very traditional women. Women still used to wear the cap, but they still wear the same stuff. These are the women, very young girls, and people do take part in these processes. I would like to say that the process of CBPR is not as linear as we've already said, that you start with thinking about a research problem and methodology, methods, strategies, tools, and everything is very linear. But in this case, when we talk about the CBPR, there are a lot many aspects. It could be the earlier research, it could be the community's push for a concern, it could be a recent incident which could instigate a desire or need for that thing, or it could be the neighboring communities doing a research and these communities are concerned just doing it for others are doing, so let's do it. Or it could be the influence of, it's very like, it's not uniform, very well researched or something. It's a very gray area. There could be multiple stimuli for which a community-based research could come up. I also wanted to share that there are, when we talk of the communities, these are the traditional ways how the communities come together. If you go to the first, the slides are probably not very well clear, but he's the Mir. Mir was the, like, it used to be a princely state, although our princely state is no more there, say after 1971, but since that existed the social play, like on the social plan, we see that social structure is still there, but politically or legally we don't have that system. But this is the Mir sitting there, and these are the people sitting around him to discuss the community issues. This is another example. It's a project dialogue where the whole community is invited, the village community is invited. You can see it's a very diverse group, old people, young people, even the children become part of it. So it's a process where I think it's very good that it's so open and so organic that everybody in the community becomes part of it. We don't really have to develop a community development program or information session for the schools or the children. They just become part of it by being there and by knowing the processes. So it's a tradition of doing the CBPR as a way of developing the community integration and stuff. This is also one of the recent examples before I was coming here. We had a community reading project, and we invited the communities. So you can see there are men and there are women as well. It's very traditionally the committees that we make. The two small slides you see, there's the committees which are formed out of these CBPR research groups, and these depend upon the committees are not really, or the focus groups are not really very uniform always. Sometimes if it's an ethical concern or a very sensitive health issue, normally the elderly are chosen to be part of that committee. If it's something concerning the families, then it's men, women, and sometimes youth. So it really depends what is the nature of the issue under discussion, and then we make the communities. And it can take where these community meetings can take place anywhere which is just accessible to the people, where people could get together and they can sit calmly and discuss things without being offensive to one another. I think it's also something which is very common in development sector, particularly with reference to Robert Chambers, when he says whose reality counts and like how to ensure participation on equal footings. So I think these open spaces are far more better because you don't have the boundaries. So anybody could come in. It's not a room to make it noisy, so children can come, the meeting takes place. Women can chatter just at the back. It's very open, it's very organic, so it's like letting people be the part of it. And it's also very easier for the people to be reflective of how the power relations are performing in that particular community. Yeah, it's just, I think it's just the closing of it, and I'd like to refer to the Butthole and Rajesh Tandon, who once said CBPR is about knowledge as an action strategy, and I think it's the community knowledge and the development experts' knowledge coming together as an action strategy for change, and about rendering visible of the excluded knowledge of our remarkable planet. And I think that when we talk with the communities, particularly in many other contexts, where communities have gathered their information and knowledge over generations, so it's a platform where the development brings the deep knowledge and the whole traditional knowledge come together. And I think it's for me, it's very exciting, fruitful, useful, and there are things for everything, but it's always very bumpy, uneven. So yeah, I think there are some questions which down the way during the discussion we will deal with. So just about why, what, who, where, I think we'll, in the discussion we'll get back there.
So now let's go to the other one. Yeah, the next slide.
So I'm gonna get close to you. Okay, I don't want you to be far away. Is that okay? Boundaries? Okay, now let's reflect a little bit on how do we navigate around these dilemmas of thinking, doing, and mobilizing research with communities. And I would like to start, I need someone here. Okay, I choose to be by you guys. My first degree was in economics, right? I spent like 4 years studying classical and neoclassical economics. No critical theory at all. And after my economics degree, and I was thinking to myself, like, okay, I want to do something out of there. I want to see people striving and get better lives. Master's degree in organizational management, but it wasn't business oriented. I started to have contact with postmodern and constructivist theories. And there are people behind the numbers. It was very nice to see people behind the numbers. And after my master's degree, I started to be in contact with communities in the Amazon. I'm from Brazil, I told you guys, I was born in the Amazon. I'm not a jungle boy, I was born in the city. But I started to work with people in the forest, the Quilombola communities, like Afro Brazilians who escaped to the forest and they built communities. And back then, like, no money involved. Like we have like a group of people, there's a very grassroots NGO, we want to do something for these people. We're gonna get into a boat, no safety. What should I do if we sink here? Okay, take 1 hour in this boat towards the forest and spend a week with them, just walking with them, learning with them. And I went back to the university. I'm here, and I'm glad because I'm in education. I was very concerned with, like, how can I connect the theory and practice? And I found this place in education. That was great. And I started to explore more on the literature of participatory action research and now community-based research, but focus on community development studies, right? And the literature says the main thing is collaboration. And when we think about collaboration, and all the authors, they are referring to the collaboration between university and communities. However, in the national development literature, there is an expectation of community autonomy. So there is this hope that one day the community will take over the process of development. They don't need academics at all. But as we come to the 2000s and now 2015, 16, like, it seems like we're not more concerned about the community autonomy, community take over the process of development, and we can see them strive and stuff. I cannot see this in anybody. And then we can go for it. Yeah. But we insist talking about it's all about relationships. We want to build relations, but what kind of relationship we are building? And think about my own experience, and I was reflecting about this article, FM Word for Entry. And we can go one more. And it's very interesting because we were able to frame the entry in the community now, right? We found a way to structure the process of entry, right? And actually, when I'm like, okay, how I start to get in contact with those communities, right? And if we take into account Joanna, Achoka, and Ellie, and Rich, they propose like this. The first thing you have to do is to pre-engage people. You have to think about your proposal and, okay, how can I get to the community? You have to position yourself strategically. I don't like this term that much, strategical. To have a strategy. Somehow we are talking about your project, your goals, what you want to achieve. But according to them, you have to meet with gatekeepers. You have to understand who is in a better place in the community that you can get along them the best way possible. And I have a quote from them here. They said, these pre-engagement meetings reinforce for us the importance of making initial contacts with an appropriate community gatekeeper. Someone who is well connected and well respected within the specific community and who sees the value in collaborative research and who can convince others to join in. So think about my own experience and how I start to approach the communities. If CBR is about people, if CBR is about people taking over the process of research or at least being involved in the process of research, when I think about being strategic and convincing others, I think it's problematic. And so we start to get in contact with them and then make clear what we're doing there, what is the research about, see who is interested in the research, and then assessment, reflection, and feedback process. How can we make sure that the process of research is going through the right direction, and then the ongoing maintenance. And I understand this. I'm not saying we should not do it. But somehow, as scholars and researchers, we try to do the best. And I really believe like this participatory, it's something we can do, we are learning to do, we are on the way still, right? When you frame those things, it's just like we're trying to get things right and not manipulate, not dominate. But we're still working on it, right? But it really bothers me when I think relationship, and is relationship and strategy? Is relationship a method? And one day I was leading this North American group in one of the communities I was working with. And they were building some awareness and stuff, and I was the translator. And the leader of the group, they said, okay guys, let's sit down. Let's ask some questions about their lives, and then we deliver a message. Like, wait a minute. You come here. You strategically, you're going to ask some questions about their lives, but you're not interested in their lives? There's something that's not quite right in this right? And actually, we're going to, Cindy will talk more about her experience, I will talk more about my experience, and this is a quote from Freire, and I like to do it in Portuguese as well. I have my Portuguese version here. And where I am right here. Am I in the right place? Yes. O diálogo é este encontro dos homens, mediatizados pelo mundo para pronunciá-lo, não se esgotando, portanto, na relação eu-tu. Essa é a razão porque não é possível o diálogo entre os que querem a pronúncia do mundo e os que não a querem, entre os que negam aos demais o direito de dizer a palavra e os que se acham negados desse direito. É preciso primeiro que os que assim se encontram negados no direito primordial de dizer a palavra reconquistem esse direito, proibindo que este assalto desumanizante continue. I like to read Portuguese. I like to read Paulo Freire in Portuguese because there is something in the language and about identity and language and the way of being a Brazilian and a Southern person. But when you start, did you read that? Yeah. Okay, we're gonna move on. Yeah, this is what it's talking about. Yes, transformation. It's all about relationship. It's about like people coming together and reflect and practice and bring reflection and action and mediated by the world, right? And see this world being transformed. And based on this, Cindy will talk a little bit about her own experience. I will talk more later.
So, as I said before, I think a lot of the work on participatory methodologies comes out of the Global South. And certainly participatory learning in action, or PRA, participatory rural appraisal, all these methodologies come out of the South. And a lot of these methodologies have actually been used and adapted in community-based research. So, just hang on one sec. So, I think when we have the intention to do community-based research, I think we also need to challenge ourselves in terms of the methodologies that we intend to use. Because it's really easy, and I'm not saying that giving by any stretch of the imagination, but sometimes there's other methodologies that are more appropriate for the people that we're working with in community. And again, it depends who is the community we're working with. So I've actually done research with other academics where the other academic was calling it participatory action research, and I said, this is not participatory action research, this is community-based research using participatory methodologies. Okay, so there's all these sort of nuanced ways of understanding, and it's part of that continuum, and it's part of understanding where you fit on the continuum for the particular work that you're engaged in. So this is research that I did on intergenerational learning in Indigenous textiles, and this was community-based, arts-based, and then that's another story, but I'm not going to tell that story. Arts-based research, and it was community-based in the sense of in two communities, one in Chile and one in Saskatchewan. Okay, so and I used methodologies that can be described as Indigenous methodologies. It was storytelling methodologies, but what I want to talk about here is in terms of the relationship with the study participants. One of the ways that I tried to engage in Indigenous methodologies was around the concept of giving back or reciprocity, as it's discussed by Linda Tulay-Smith. And so it's also problematic, I think, and more research needs to be done on reciprocity. It is an under-researched area in terms of what is meant by that. And I openly invited the women I was working with in Saskatchewan to, discuss what they wanted to do with the research, with the knowledge we were creating. And they wanted an art exhibition. And I felt, I opened myself to that. Probably it's too big an opening, so just, I don't know if you've created an art exhibition, it went way beyond what I had funding to do, etc. And the group in Chile wanted a book, okay? Which I had a hard time understanding because they're from an oral-based culture, but what it was about the intergenerational learning and the fact that their kids would read it through a book. And that also was problematic because in the end, when you're working with an oral-based community and you're dealing with the funder's deadline, you don't get the material submitted and written and published in time, and therefore I ended up working with grad students to get the book written in time and made them co-authors of the process. So, yeah. And then this is another example. This was policy research with women on social assistance, looking at their care of young children. And in this research, we use participatory methodologies. This houses them saying the work they do inside the home, and it's a process of validating that work. But what was really interesting in this research, so this was community-based research with participatory methodologies, but it became participatory action research in that, in our final meeting with 22 women on social assistance, they said they wanted to form a group. And it was like, okay, for us, the researchers, we were done. Our research was done. We had never intended that this would be action research. But because of the process and the engagement with the participants in the process, we felt compelled to continue working with them and at least help them to understand how organizations work, et cetera, so that they could take over the process themselves. So sometimes what you think you're starting with might not be what you end up doing. And that's all, I think, if you open yourself to that, there's a lot more things that are possible. So here's a very organic piece of research. You're probably aware in Saskatchewan, the government cut Saskatchewan Transportation Company. So the day that it was cut, a colleague, another professor at the University of Regina, phoned me and said, what do we do? I said, we hit the ground running. So we've been working with communities and continue to work with communities in developing, at this point, alternatives, looking, we get calls from the media constantly, but this became research in a very organic way. And so what do you call it? It's definitely community-based. And it's definitely relational. So I just think it's an interesting example because it doesn't really have a, we can say it's community-based research, but certainly using, we worked with and we had people identify how the cuts to the STC affected their lives, and we drew it. So we've got a story, okay? So we've done our ethics, just in case you're wondering. and that's totally unfunded research. And then this is also, this was defined as community-based participatory action research with the Prairie School for Union Women, which is the largest feminist school in the world. And it's been going for 20 years in Saskatchewan. And during the first study, we found out that people's lives are being transformed by this school, so we did a second study on transformation and how to sustain it. And in the end, here's what's interesting. So this was PAR right from the start. The initial funding for this, by the way, came from CIDRI. So the participants helped in designing the questions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end, we workshopped recommendations that came out of the study. This is the part where you, as the researcher, walk out. You're done, right? Sort of. You still have a relationship with the school, and for me, it's now resulted in that we heard this week our book is getting published. But anyway, that the leadership of the school hasn't really implemented what the steering body wanted it implemented. But that relational structure, sorry, not the word structure, but that relational structure is outside of my power, right? It's a relationship within the community. So, that's the last one. That's you.
Okay. Now I have to apply all the seminar things. Ta-da! Exactly, do all the...
It's already 10 to 1. Too.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I'll have to finish this thing. I'm sorry, guys. So, what are you doing here? I was reading some community-based, actually community development, people-oriented content, and I'm like, okay, should I go to the community, not offering something to them at the first place, or really like to come alongside them and spend time with them, learning from them. This is my position here. And I tried. I took one of my, a group of students there, was a community development instructor in Brazil, and the community leader kept me asking the question, what are you doing here? Like, I want to learn from you guys, I want to spend time with you, but what are you doing here? Because all the experience with researchers and policymakers coming to the community, extracting things, ask them questions and leave. But like, we were trying a different approach.